Hello people, I'm back. Another video here. This video is titled Persons Are Fictional Beings. Touched on this in the video just before this one. But before I get into that main topic, personal or fictional beings, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of sovereignty. People don't get it. A lot of talk about sovereignty and sovereign citizens. Of course, sovereign citizen, I think most people realize that's an oxymoron. But so is the concept that I'm a sovereign. So let's talk about that. And I appreciate that the courts have said the sovereignty resides in the people. That's to appeal to our vanity. See, the basis of government authority is the will of the people, and the will of the people is not also the will of God. And in order for the system to exist, it needs us to believe, or it needs to see us that we are sovereigns. Because if we're not sovereigns, then it's our will can't be done. If our will can't be done, and that only leaves God's will, because there's only two wills on this planet, man's and God's. That's it. There's nothing else. Man's will be done, or God's will be done. Lord's Prayer says God's will be done, right? Well, when the sovereignty is in the people, it's our will being done. So in order for us to have the power to be the basis of government authority, we have to basically usurp God off the throne. Kick him off the throne. Oh God, you're not my maker, you're not my sovereign. We the people collectively are the sovereign. Okay, we the people, citizens of it, which, and these people now we're talking about, that the courts are talking about, are the people of the country. Not men, not women, they're talking about the people of the country. So the people of the country have the sovereigns. Of course the people of the country have to be sovereigns, because that's the only way they can have the power, the will, the authority to vote government officials into office, to represent these people in the legislatures. In other words, the sovereignty is in the people. The sovereign is the lawmaker. Okay, so if the sovereignty resides in the people and everybody wants to believe that, then you want to say you're a sovereign. Well, that's fine and dandy, but you're of the country when you do that. And collectively, yes, the will of the people, the collective will of the people is the basis of government authority that goes into the legislature, where they pass the laws and then turn around and pass those very same laws on the very same people that voted those laws into existence through their elected representatives. That's one of the benefits and privileges of being a member of a country. Yep, we all get to make the laws. People complain about this, complain about that, so then a politician goes in and takes that voice of the people and goes into the legislatures or Congress, whatever, and we need a law against this. People are complaining about this. They're going to pass a law, and they're going to do it in the name of the people. So, and then they're going to turn around and impose that very same law on the people. The point being here is that there is only one sovereign in existence, period. One true sovereign. Let me give an example of this, of what a true sovereign is, and this is what I don't think people understand about sovereignty. The sovereign is the lawmaker, and the sovereign is not subject to the law. The Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, is a very good example of this. She's the queen of a counterfeit fictional world, a fictional reality. It's a very good example. She rules over the temporal, the secular realm, the things of this world, persons. The laws are passed in her name. Now, you have to understand how things work here, in particular in Canada. It's deemed that people have pledged allegiance to the Queen, so all the powers now vest in the Queen, who then lends that power in the name of the people, who then lends that power to the government of the day. So it's still the same thing, except we're going through the Queen now. That's the only difference. So yes, all of these laws are passed in the name of the Queen, and the Queen is not subject to those laws, because in their fictional world, she's the sovereign. She cannot be taken to court, neither criminal nor civil. And I believe the President of the United States is untouchable in the same manner. He's the big cheese. He's the lawmaker. That all sounds fine and dandy, and that's probably why people want to claim sovereignty, because, well, if the sovereignty resides in the people, and the people are the lawgiver, and the sovereign, the lawgiver, is not subject to the law, then I want to be that guy. But it doesn't work that way. See, we can't have 7 billion lawmakers running around on planet Earth. Imagine that. Yeah, everybody's a sovereign. Yeah, we've got 7 billion plus sovereigns running around on planet Earth, each making their own law. And maybe my law is I want what you have, and my law says I have the right to kill you to have it. Just think about that for a few minutes, the insanity of that, if the sovereignty was to reside in the people as individuals. Just makes no sense. None whatsoever. So anyhow, I assure you have no sovereignty in a fictional world, a world made up of persons, a world of make-believe, A world made up of fictional beings. There's no sovereignty there for us. It's ridiculous. A world in which there is no equality. See, in God's kingdom, all men are created equal. And God does not has no respect of person, so he doesn't care what's going on in man's kingdom, where you got kings and queens and lords and sweepers and cooks and butlers, all different persons but different class, right? Different, what's the word I'm looking for? Make come to me, hierarchy. But none of that exists in God's kingdom. We're all equal. So, and in that fictional world, you're not God. We're not God. We're not above the law. Furthermore, as they say, we cannot have 7 billion people plus billion people claiming to be sovereigns. So being in the real world, now here's what people need to understand about sovereignty. This part they don't get, I don't think. Based on what I'm hearing out there, it's real, they throw out, talk about, oh yeah, the court says the sovereignty resides in the people. Again, in order for the people to be the basis of government authority, it has to be that way. It's not the way God wants it. That's the way man wants it. And go back to 1 Samuel 8:10-17, where we, the people, petition God for another king. Get it? And that king's going to turn around, and then God tells us, well, what that king's going to do to us. And that's exactly what's happening to everybody. So the will of the people's, all that power is going into that fictional world. And then that fictional world is passing all of these acts. Everyone's partaking in these acts as persons, and all these acts are just, it's the actors are persons. So being in the real world where men and women are, who here is not subject to the law of gravity? And you think you're a sovereign? Give your head a shake. Seriously. And people talk that the penalty for treason is death. Interesting how, and here we are, billions of people appearing as dead fictional beings. Everyone's pretending to be something they're not. Everyone's pretending to be a person. Everyone is, in fact, that's that graven image I've talked about, a fictional being. Is that the penalty for high treason? The penalty for attempting to overthrow God's government, his will, his authority, with our will be done? Our authority be done? I don't know, I'm just saying. So, seriously, the sovereign is not subject to the law. The sovereign is the lawmaker. I give you an example of the Queen. Now, there's not a man or woman, to my knowledge, on planet Earth that is not subject to or is immune from or has exception with respect to the law of gravity. In other words, if you jump off a cliff, your body's going to go splat. When it hits the bottom, it's that sudden stop gets you, right? And there's other laws that apply to us, men and women. Most people are ignorant of these laws because they're too focused on the laws of men. What's going on this planet? Everybody's aware of the American laws and the Canadian laws and the provincial laws and the state laws and New Zealand laws and Australia laws, but is anybody aware of what God's laws are? The laws of life? So why don't we just forget about the moment here for about being sovereigns in the dead system world, fictional world, form only, remember, form only. Maybe put our attention back to our maker, where our birthright, our inheritance, our true power, property, rights, and duties are. So, that's all I want to talk about on sovereignty. So I'm just going to pause here, and I'll come back here, and we'll pick up on the main topic of this video. Persons are fictional beings, and they are. Got a good closing video clip here for you on that. Okay, so just to settle that once and for all, either God is the sovereign or your country is the sovereign. That's it. Take your pick. Choose wisely. So yeah, now on to the personal or fictional beings, and this all, of course, relates to reclaiming your securities. And I want to make sure I remind people here there are many possibilities how to use the reclaim your securities information, and collapsing a trust is one of them. Maybe one of the more easier ones. There's no single one process here with respect to reclaiming your securities per se. No, many possibilities. Not one particular process. Many possibilities means more than one. And if you've not done so, be sure to go through all of Article 8 of the UCC, Article 8.5 section and 8.6 section. You will find the rights of the entitlement holder there, as well as the rights and duties of the securities intermediary. Same in Securities Transfer Act, Part 6 onward. Very powerful stuff there, people, with respect to getting performance, holding them accountable. Remember, these codes, these legislations are binding on those other fictional powers to be, which is really no power at all, but work with it. So for example, protection of entitlement holders from adverse claim. We've touched on adverse claim previously, but there's more detail as you get further into the legislation. I've recommended people that they read the entirety of UCC Article 8 and the entirety of the securities transfer legislation. But so for Part 90, or Section 96 of the Securities Transfer Act is protection of entitlement holders from adverse claim. A legal proceeding based on an adverse claim to a financial asset, the foundational security is that financial asset, however framed, may not be brought against a person who acquires a security entitlement under Section 95 for value and without notice of the adverse claim. So this is why we say the estate does not consent to act as surety on their bonds. Pretty potent if what you say there, when you say that, if it's backed by a registered lien interest indicating the financial asset as collateral and you've given notice. Very powerful. I think people are catching on to this stuff yet. And I'm not looking for successes. You should be looking for success. I'm not. And I remind people the person named on the birth certificate is the entitlement holder, provided the rules that are binding on them, are their fictional powers to be, there's really no power at all, have been complied with. Of course, as per our security agreement, that person assigns its interest to a proxy. You can't represent that person without implicating yourself. That's why we need the proxy. And that the secure party, and that secure party represents you and the public. So you, through it, can defend claims and protect your property interests. Yep. And I would not claim that I am the entitlement holder, because to do that is to say I am the person named on the birth certificate, and if you haven't got it yet, a person is a fictional being. And if I was that person, then I'm saying, and my God, my queen, or pardon me, my country, my queen is my God. Now that God, like God says, is going to impose a lot of burdens on you. 1 Samuel 8, 10 to 17. If you haven't read it yet, I'd read it. We're all living it. So whoever, regardless of who wrote that book, that was written a long time ago. And it's 100% accurate. So whether people want to believe, well, how could God didn't do that? Man did that. Well, maybe God did it through man. Just like when in Hebrews it talks about in times past, God spoke to us through the prophets, and these times he spoke to us through his son, a man. So clearly, God's made everything. He can do whatever he wants. So just bear that in mind to go through the entirety of UCC Article 8 and the entirety of the Securities Transfer Act. A lot of meat in there. A lot of meat. And all of this brings me to my next point. Who am I? Which name do I use in my communications? Why may this be important? Well, let's get into that. And I've said previously in the previous video, your identity is not what you are, but what you are of. And you're either of God or you're of a country. Which, if you're of a country, then that's your God. Whose laws are you obeying? Now, if you're of a monkey, and I don't believe that, because you see, everything is of something. It's important here. Everything is of something. Like a kitten is of a mom and dad cat. A puppy dog is of a mom and dad dog. The little froggies of a mom and dad frog. And the little snake is of a mom and dad snake. And children are of a mom and dad man and woman. Okay? And you look, and we're all made in the image of. Okay? So a cat looks like a cat. A kitten looks like a cat. And a puppy looks like a dog. And a child looks like his mom and dad. I hadn't seen anybody that's walking around looking like that has the answers that is a monkey that's of a monkey. Everything is of something other than God. God is the only thing that is self-made. There's no self-made men on the planet. We didn't make ourselves. We didn't make anything for that matter. You know, an old story, got to say this. Scientist says to God, God, we don't need you anymore. God says, oh, really? Scientist says, yep. Yeah, we can do arm transplants, leg transplants, heart transplants, head transplants. Heck, we can even grow children in a test tube. God says, would you like to put that to a test? Scientist says, yes. The scientist starts reaching for the ground. God says, what are you doing? The scientist says, getting some dust. God says, get your own dust. So yeah, your identity is not what you are, but what you're of. So if you're a person, you're of the country. If you're a man, you're of God. But we've done stuff that's tainted everything. So as of now, it is deemed you is of a country. As such, you are subject to the collective will of the people as expressed through various acts, legislation, acts. It's all an act. And you read it there, it's a person, no person shall do this, no person shall do that. It's all an act. We all got a name when we were born. We can say you or your mom owns that name, but the thing is, that name is believed now to identify you are of a country, a Canadian, a German, an Australia, an American, so on, so forth. That name was used to apply for driver's license, SSN number, SIN number, passport, to purchase things in that name, open bank accounts, so on and so forth, taxes paid, so on and so forth. Those acts constitute a change of identity from of God, which is from where we have a birthright, an inheritance, and freedom, to of a country, and in bondage wherein we own no property. And if you don't own property, you have no control. And here is the wisdom. If that name was used by you in the public in any way, say John Paul Smith, it identifies you as being of a country, a Canadian, etc. You, your life, your property, no longer belong to you, subject to the laws of God, or the will of God, but you belong to and are owned by the Queen or country. Now, a name is how a thing is known. In other words, if your name is John Paul Smith and you used it in the public to apply for whatever, which is begging, to your other God. See, our God, we don't have to beg, just ask. This one you got to beg. It's the opposite of, it's like light and dark, right? It's good and bad, good and evil. So our God is good. The other one pretends to be good, but that's where the evil is, quite frankly. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. That's my knowingness. Let me rephrase that. So a name is how a thing is known. In other words, if your name is John Paul Smith and you used it in the public to apply for whatever, that name is now tainted. There is a record. That name, regardless of format or style, upper, lowercase, all caps, whatever, will be used to label you a Canadian or whatever, citizen, nationality, whatever, American, Australian, Japanese, Chinese, German, Irishman, whatever. As such, you as property belonging to the state, and think deeply on that. Maybe when you sign as authorized representative for the person, the estate, you want to use a different name or a name that does not look or sound like the one you've used that's tainted. All right? It is another reason we use a proxy, to keep man and the things that may cause confusion, that may taint what you're doing off the table. And for the record, we are not talking a legal name change. We're not talking about applying to a human government and begging for a name change. To do that would change nothing. Your country will continue to be your God, your owner. Whose laws are you using here? Whose laws are you obeying here? Whose laws are you following? God's or man's? It's not, well, sometimes God's and sometimes man's. Okay, we've all done it. We've all obeyed the laws of man. We've all jumped ship. Everyone I know on planet Earth that I've met. Everyone. And I'm going to close this video with a short clip by Abram, a friend of mine out in Alberta. I've got his permission to show this. It's kind of a spin-off on a webinar he was on, or part of. And you have to pause this video as you go through it because there's some stuff to read there. It's would suggest you read it. It's important with respect to fictional beings, the source of that. You'll see the evidence to back it up. Not making this stuff up. So be sure you pause it and follow along there, like fiction of fictional beings and what it all means at the end of the day. And know this, every court has fictional jurisdiction, which means no jurisdiction at all. And that's from Marcus Servant King. It's brilliant. Brilliant when you understand it. So again, people, forget the I'm a sovereign thing, because that's just keeping the noose around your neck, quite frankly. And on our security agreement, there's a spot where you would put your name down there as the authorized representative. And I say again, if you've gone by the name John Paul Smith and they're looking in the records and they're seeing John Paul Smith and they're going, well, he's an American, or he's a Canadian, or he's a Chinaman, or he's of New Zealand. So you see, in their minds, I'm talking about in the system now, the government people, the corporate people, they're going to see what they see in the computer, and what they're going to see, regardless of what's going on in your mind, they're going to see John Paul Smith and think, well, he's the fact that that name is here, the fact that it's here in these records, he has chosen Canada or the Queen or the United States, whatever, to be his God. That's the evidence of it. Simple as that. It's there. It's in the system. So you can see that if you're using that name on other documentation, that they're going to draw the same conclusions. So seriously, you may want to say, and there's no laws against picking a new name. You can have whatever name you want, so long as it's not for fraudulent purposes. And even in the kingdom of God, this, everybody should be upright and honest, right and forthright. None of this deception stuff, like we are all deeply involved in for a very long time here. And keep in mind here, we people created this system. It wasn't God. It was us did it. We are the problem. We are the cure. So I'm just suggesting that, for example, on your security agreement, maybe you say, okay, well, I did use John Paul Smith, and it's John Paul Smith is the estate. It looks like John Paul Smith on the SSN. If I put John Paul Smith as the authorized representative for those John Paul Smiths, they might think that's all one and the same and just ignore the whole thing. So to avoid that, I'm going to put something different down there for the authorized representative, because at the end of the day, it's my proxy speaking for me in the public anyhow. I just don't want them to see that it's, that it's representing that John Paul Smith that looks like it's an American or a Canadian or is presumed or deemed to be. Seriously, people. And I said in our Reclaiming Securities Zoom meetings when I first started off, I'm not in the business of telling people who they are. I think you're all smart and quite capable of thinking for yourselves, and you don't need me. I'm not here to tell people who they are. That's ridiculous. So, but I thought to share this a little bit here to get people thinking at least, and it may be what's stymieing some of your communications. Not to mention, as I've mentioned before, that a lot of government offices are not manned by people. There's nobody actually receiving the mail, but they are receiving email. And I think that's it. I'll just put it on pause here briefly and just double check my thoughts and my notes, make sure I said what I came to say. So anyhow, that's with our Reclaiming Securities package is how you can now interface in the public, secure and protect your property interests without actually having to bind yourself into that system to stay out of that system. When it comes to upholding claiming and securing your property rights and your interests through the proxy. And anyhow, so like I say, I'm going to close this video. We'll close with a short clip from Abraham, and you'll see that here. And that'll be the end of the clip, this video. So I thank you for watching, for listening, putting up with me again, and keep your spirits high. The light of God never fails, people. The light of God never fails. So no matter how dark it might seem to be out there, the light of God never fails. The dark cannot win and never will. It's not possible. Hang on to that. God bless you. I love you.